Hey everyone, welcome back. Get ready for a deep dive into music history, but not the way you might expect.
Oh, this is going to be good. I can already tell.
We're going deep into the music scene of the 60s and 70s, talking about a group you've probably never heard of.
And I bet you've heard their work.
Oh, absolutely. They're the unsung heroes behind some of the biggest hits of all time. I mean, seriously, hundreds of chart toppers. Think Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, Sonny and Cher. The list goes on and on.
The talent behind the curtain is sometimes even more mind-blowing than the names in the spotlight, you know?
Totally. But here's the thing. These musicians were rarely ever credited. They were the invisible force behind the music.
The ghost band. I love it. So who are these mystery hitmakers?
That's what we're here to uncover. Let's talk about the Wrecking Crew.
The Wrecking Crew, what a name, right? Kind of contradictory when you think about how successful they were.
Yeah. It's supposed to make you wonder. Wrecking Crew sounds kind of rebellious, almost like they were trying to shake things up in the music industry. Well, there are actually a bunch of stories about where that name came from.
Oh, really? Spill the tea.
One theory, and this one comes from drummer Hal Blaine himself, is that older musicians saw rock and roll as like this threat to the old way of doing things. And the Wrecking Crew, well, they were right there on the front lines of that new sound, changing the game.
I can see why they might have felt wrecked. But just to be clear, we're not talking about a band in the traditional sense, are we?
Right. It wasn't like a fixed group of musicians like the Beatles or something.
More like a collective.
Exactly. The Wrecking Crew was this loose-knit group of incredibly talented session musicians, mostly based in Los Angeles. And what made them so special was their versatility. Pop, rock, R&B, even film scores and TV themes. They did it all.
That's wild. They were like chameleons of sound. Okay, so we've got this mysterious group of incredibly talented musicians shaping the sound of a generation. But why were session musicians so important back then, especially in the 1960s?
Well, think about the recording technology back then. Multi-tracking, which lets you layer instruments and vocals separately. It wasn't as advanced as it is now. Back then, to get that big, full sound, you often needed everyone playing live in the studio, all at once.
A true team effort.
Absolutely. And LA was the place for recording. Studios were booked solid, time was money, and producers needed musicians who could nail a part quickly without any drama.
So they needed someone who could just walk in and absolutely nail it first try.
That's exactly it. And the Wrecking Crew, they were the best of the best. They could sight-read complex arrangements, move between different musical styles easily. They were the secret weapon behind so many hits.
Talk about pressure.
Tell me about it. But they thrived under pressure. And you know what's even more interesting? Many of them weren't just rock and rollers.
Oh, they had a secret past.
You could say that. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Get this, came from a jazz background.
Whoa, really? Jazz musicians laying down the grooves for pop hits. That's wild.
It is. But that's part of what made them so special, so unique. They brought this incredible musical sophistication to pop music. It wasn't just about playing the right notes. It was about bringing a depth of expression and improvisation.
Just they were elevating the sound.
Exactly.
It makes sense, you know? When you listen to those 60s hits now, there's something about them, this richness and texture.
Yeah.
It's like they have this extra layer of magic.
And you know, that magic, a lot of it comes from those jazz-infused chops. Rhythm, harmony, improvisation. They just understood it on a different level, and you can hear it in the music.
It all comes full circle. And here's the really wild part. Some of those names in the Wrecking Crew, they didn't stay hidden forever. Some of them became huge stars in their own right.
I know, right? It's crazy. Like, we're talking about Glenn Campbell.
Glenn Campbell, the country music legend. Before all of that, he was a sought-after session guitarist. He even toured with the Beach Boys for a while.
Yeah, and that's not even scratching the surface.
Leon Russell, Dr. John. It's mind-blowing to think about the talent packed into this one group. Speaking of, what were some of those huge iconic songs they played on?
Oh man, where do we even begin? Let's start with the Wall of Sound.
The Wall of Sound. You mean Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, that massive layered sound?
That's the one. And the Wrecking Crew. They were all over it.
Wait, really? Like what songs?
Oh, so many. Be My Baby by the Ronettes. You know, that iconic drum beat. That's all Wrecking Crew. And You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin' by the Righteous Brothers. Those soaring strings, the powerful drums, that's them again.
I always thought those recordings had huge orchestras, not this smaller group of studio musicians.
That's the genius of it. They were masters at making this huge epic sound with a surprisingly small setup. But it wasn't just about technical skill, you know. It was about feeling. about passion.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, listen to River Deep Mountain High by Ike and Tina Turner. That raw energy, that intensity, those soaring vocals. The Wrecking Crew brought it all, pouring their heart and soul into every note.
It's true, you can really feel it in that song. Okay, so they nailed Spector's sound, but what about other artists, like the Beach Boys, for example? You mentioned Glenn Campbell's connection earlier. How did the rest of the Wrecking Crew factor into their sound?
Oh, get ready, because this one is really cool. The Wrecking Crew played a huge role in shaping one of the most acclaimed albums of all time. The Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Pet Sounds, you mean the album that completely revolutionized pop music with those complex harmonies and crazy innovative recording techniques?
Exactly. Brian Wilson, the creative genius behind the Beach Boys, he was pushing the boundaries of what pop music could be. He wanted those lush orchestral arrangements, those intricate harmonies, and he knew exactly who to call to make it happen. The Wrecking Crew.
Wow. So this group, who most people have never even heard of, played a key role in one of the most influential albums ever made.
It's mind-blowing, right? And it goes way beyond those big collaborations, too. Their sound, it's all over the charts.
Hit me with some more. This is like discovering a secret playlist of amazing songs I didn't even realize I loved.
You ready? Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds. You know, that jangly folk rock masterpiece? That's the Wrecking Crew, baby.
Seriously? No way. I had no idea. What else?
Okay, get ready for this, Nancy Sinatra's. These boots are made for walking. That swagger, that attitude, pure Wrecking Crew magic.
Wow. You weren't kidding. They really were everywhere. But if they were so good, so in demand, why did their era end? I mean, music didn't just stop in the 70s.
You're right, the music kept going, but the way music was made, that started to change.
What do you mean?
Well, for one thing, rock bands, they started wanting to play their own instruments on their records. More authenticity, you know.
So less need for the studio guns.
Right. Plus, multi-tracking technology kept getting better, more accessible. It meant that artists could record their parts separately and piece everything together later, instead of having to nail everything live in the studio.
I see. So it wasn't just the music, it was technology changing the entire game.
Exactly. And then you had the rise of synthesizers, drum machines. Suddenly you can replicate a lot of those sounds electronically, which used to require a whole team of musicians.
The digital age was changing everything.
Exactly. So, yeah, the need for session musicians. It didn't go away entirely, but things were definitely different. The days of those large, versatile groups, like the Wrecking Crew, that era had to change with the times.
It's kind of sad, in a way, you know. Technology gave artists more control, more flexibility. But there's something magical about those old recording sessions, you know? That raw energy, the collaboration between artists and these amazing musicians, it feels like a lost art.
I know what you mean. But here's the thing. The Wrecking Crew might not have gotten the fame or recognition of the artists they played with, but their impact, that's undeniable. They shaped the sound of a generation. And it makes you wonder, how many other Wrecking Crews are out there, behind the scenes? People working in different fields, shaping the world around us, and we don't even realize it.
It really is amazing when you think about it. We focus so much on the names and lights, the stars.
It's true, and we rarely pause to consider the incredible talent behind the scenes, making it all happen.
It's like a good reminder to be more curious about the world around us, to appreciate the unseen forces that shape everything.
I like that. Looking beyond the surface. It's too easy to take things for granted.
Absolutely. But speaking of giving credit where it's due, was there ever any formal recognition for the Wrecking Crew? I mean, besides this deep dive, of course.
There was. They may not have gotten their names on all those album covers, but they weren't totally forgotten. Back in 2007, they were inducted into the Musicians Hall of Fame.
Well deserved, even if it was a little overdue. Still, I bet most people have never even heard of them, which is kind of sad, you know? These were the unsung heroes, the studio wizards who helped create the soundtrack of a generation. It makes you wonder, what would those classic songs sound like without them?
Right. It's crazy to think about. I guess it just goes to show you the power of collaboration, you know?
Yeah.
These incredibly talented people coming together to create something truly special.
It really does. Well, one thing's for sure, I don't think I'll ever hear those 60s and 70s hits the same way again.
Me neither. There's a whole new depth to them now, isn't there?
Totally. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Wrecking Crew. We hope you learned something new and maybe feel inspired to dig a little deeper into the music you love. Until next time, keep those records spinning.